Hi, and welcome to part 4 of our spring 2019 cruise in the stunning Pacific Northwest. We've been cruising close to 4 weeks and we're slowly heading home. After leaving the Calgary Yacht Club's flotilla in Lund, we settled into Smuggler Cove for a few days. First up was a quick trip into Secret Cove to pick up some FSR, and then it was time for me to deal with some bright work. That took most of the day, and even then I didn't get as much done as I wanted to. After a day's work, we decided to take off the next day and dinghy over to Thormanby Island to enjoy the beach. It was midweek in May and we had this popular picnic spot almost completely to ourselves. We walked the sandy beaches and poked around looking at driftwood, shells, and enjoying the sunshine. I took the opportunity to write a few messages in the sand just for posterity's sake. On the west side of the sandy spit, the clams were spitting up a storm, and it occurred to me that I'd never really tried to dig up a clam. So I grabbed a sturdy stick and started digging. I unearthed a small varnish clam pretty quickly, but I wasn't really sure if it was still alive. So we put him back in a small pool, and lo and behold, after a few seconds, his foot appeared, and over the course of the next 4 or 5 minutes, he slowly pulled himself back into the sand. We chatted on the beach for a while with a fellow who was sailing with his family in a smaller sailboat. His outboard had died, and so he was sailing pretty much everywhere. Back on board, we relaxed in the cockpit for a while, made some dinner, and just hung out while the clouds rolled in and the wind came up. We had intended to head for Nanaimo Harbor the next day, but the winds and weather were predicted to be pretty crappy. Since we needed a bit more power, we decided to go over to Secret Cove Marina the next morning. It was really quiet at the marina, with only this 50-plus foot converted racing boat to keep us company. I spent quite a bit of time just staring at all the rigging and trying to make sense of all the extra lines. All in all, it was a quiet day and nothing much got done. The next morning, it was back across the strait on a cloudy, gloomy day with remarkably little wind. Whiskey Gulf, the military test area outside Nanaimo, was active that day, so we were forced to skirt the outlines or risk the wrath of the military patrols. We skirted the edge of the Mary Island Lighthouse and the weather station before finally turning towards Nanaimo. We could see a cruiser or a frigate stooging around on the far side of the zone, over by Bolinas Island, but we never did figure out who they were or what they were doing. The wind eventually came up and we got to raise the sails for a while. After we passed Entrance Island, things got incredibly crowded. We had the Duke Point ferry heading in from behind. The 2 Departure Bay ferries were crossing just behind us, a C-span barge crossing a bow, and another C-span transport that came up from behind us and passed us. We were still sailing, which technically made us the stand-on vessel, but who gives way to who is a bit more complicated when dealing with big ships in a restricted maneuvering area. Just a bit later, we dropped anchor in Mark Bay. The anchorage was nearly empty, if you didn't count the private moorings, and there were a lot more private moorings than last year. We opted to grab dinner and some cider at the Dinghy Dock pub, since that would save us from having to shop for one more meal. We were almost bang on in our plans to use up all the provisions. After that, it was a warm, calm night and we drifted off to sleep. We woke up to a sunny, warm morning. I spotted a smaller sailboat sporting the white ensign on one of the park mooring buoys. A quick Google and it turned out that there were two of them, and they were the Royal Canadian Navy's STV Goldcrest and Tuna. These were two CS-36s that were bought back in the 80s to provide hands-on, small craft sailing experience to Navy personnel. When we came in the previous evening, I had spotted a mast in the cut between Protection Island and Newcastle, so we rowed over to check it out. Looks like somebody was caught out by the drying reef and foundered. It couldn't have been there too long, a couple of months maybe, although it had been stripped pretty thoroughly. But I wonder just whose responsibility it is to get rid of the wreck. We stopped off in the city harbor, and that's when I figured out that the Goldcrest and the Tuna were here for the VanIsle 360. This is a big international race around Vancouver Island. I posted a pic, and Matt from Gudgeon let me know that the RCN vessels also had one of the Orca-class patrol vessels as their support vessel. I thought that was pretty cool. That evening we had a lovely walk in and around Protection Island, and then finished it off by watching dueling seagulls. The 31st of May was Leslie's last day aboard, so we did pretty much nothing except meet Leslie's parents in town for lunch and start packing up our stuff so I wouldn't have to do it all alone. June 1st, and it was time to get Leslie to the ferry terminal so she could head off to her conference in Vancouver. As we raised anchor, all the Swiftsure boats were starting to come out of the harbor. So we drifted around for a while, watching them zoom back and forth in anticipation of the race start. It's pretty exciting stuff, and beautiful in its own sort of way. After they were headed off to start their race, we tied up in our slip and then walked over to the ferry terminal to get Leslie on her way. Back on board, I set out to replace our now almost dark chart plotter with one that I had ordered off of eBay. The backlight in the old one is totally gone, so it was almost unusable by our second week of this cruise. I woke alone the next day and started scrubbing canvas. Unfortunately, in a bit of an unthinking moment, I had bought mildew remover instead of canvas cleaner, and while the end result was slightly better, it lacked the spiffy final result I'd been anticipating. Then it was just enough time for me to do the last-minute laundry and packing away all the last few items before hauling them up to the storage unit. Everything was prepped for my 7 a.m. departure, and I put the remnants of our supplies on the counter for the staff to dispose of as they will. It was a calm, clear morning when I said goodbye to Never Forever and headed over to the seaplane base. The usual pleasant flight over to YVR, and a few hours later I was boarding the plane for home. Well, that's it for our 2019 cruising adventures. I hope you enjoyed them as much as we did.